The subject of this fireside was brought on by a tweet. Arbor Eric tweets, always surprised how the Occupy veterans I meet on the street have not one single criticism for that movement. I met one with neo-pronouns the other day, and they were arguing for restarting it. Anarchists learn nothing. As an Occupy veteran, a day oneer, as some of us are called, I hear and understand the sentiment offered here, if I may provide some nuanced clarity to this subject. Occupy Wall Street was a brief and sweet moment in time where the contemporary left found itself in alignment with populist working class sentiment and in alignment with orthodox leftism, emphasizing the struggle of the 99% against the 1%. At the time, people were angry with the bailouts that Wall Street were allocated in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. Middle America was coming to the realization that government was not coming to their rescue, but rather to the rescue of the financial interests which sparked that crisis. However, before I speak about Occupy, I must speak briefly about the Tea Party. The Tea Party, which formed in late 2006 as an uneasy alliance between libertarians, 9/11 truthers, and paleo-conservatives growing weary of the imperialist neoconservative current permeating through the Republican Party, really, and thus putting Ron Paul into mainstream consciousness. They really came into power after the 2008 bailouts were allocated in a bipartisan package and after Obama passed the Affordable Care Act. However, by that point, the grassroots anti-neocon movement was quickly hijacked by the predominantly neo-Calvinist Caucasian elements and steered the Tea Party into attacking Barack Obama and big government spending. And really, Obama, levied austerity measures. He wasn't a big government socialist, as they claim. Absent of directly addressing imperialist designs of the Irving Kristol gang, and lost its true purpose. At the time when the Tea Party was becoming mainstream, the contemporary left was mobilizing with their own grassroots anti-austerity movements. Internationally speaking, there were anti-austerity protests occurring in England, Spain, and Greece. Anarchists and communists marched in the streets, often in black bloc formations, and waged subversive struggles in the streets in direct response to International Monetary Fund austerity packages. In late 2010, early 2011, the Arab Spring occurred, backed by Western capitalist interests, hiding behind the veil of democracy and human rights, and Middle Eastern regimes were challenged in Egypt and Tunisia, adding enough instability in the region for the West to enter Libya and change their regime by force, and also laying the groundwork for the Syrian civil war, which still rages on today. With all these elements happening globally, Adbusters, the Canadian anti-consumerist magazine, on July 13, 2011, put out a call for Western leftist organizations and activists to stage pro-democracy, non-hierarchical protests in the United States in the form of Occupy Wall Street. The call was answered by organizations in New York. New Yorkers Against Budget Cuts comes to mind here, and anarchists such as David Graeber, and had the backing of nonprofit organizations and interests. In addition, the Democratic National Committee had operatives on the ground to coordinate the energy of the movement into challenging the potentially channeling the potentially radical energy of the movement into a mobilization of young people that would back the reformist agenda of the Democratic Party. In the early weeks of the physical occupation of Liberty Square in New York, which started on September 17, 2011, this was intended to only last for 2 weeks. However, people from all different backgrounds, ranging from anarchist, progressive, communist, and libertarian, would find themselves on the same page with the intent of challenging the state corporate apparatus. And eventually, the encampment would more or less take a life of its own and go for, say, 60 days or 58 days instead of the 2 weeks which were originally intended. This struggle would initially captivate the imagination of the American proletariat, who felt abandoned by their political leaders in the wake of the 2008 economic crisis. As a result, copycat Occupy demonstrations would pop up in cities all throughout the United States and later all throughout the world, unified around the message of 99% versus 1%. This was a threat to the corporate state apparatus, which acted directly in the form of brutal repression and crackdowns. You had the Scott Olson episode in Occupy Oakland. I believe that was on October 5th. Correct me if I'm wrong, 2011. Where, a military veteran got a chunk of his head blown off by, he didn't die, but a chunk of his head was missing as a result of a beanbag that an Oakland police riot cop shot at him. And strategically, in terms of dispatching their agents to sow division and dissension within the Occupy apparatus, and turn the non-partisan movement into a partisan effort to elect reformist politicians, while weaponizing the mainstream media to expose Occupy's weakness and turn public perception against the movement. In short, this is a summary of what occurred. I am currently composing a memoir on this subject, and it will not be a quick read either. The core group that emerged from the post-eviction of Zuccotti Park over the years would eventually find itself far removed from the original nonpartisan mission of the movement of fighting the 1%, and instead would find itself getting lost in the rabbit hole of hyperpartisanship, pursuing cultural wars, and with the rise of Donald Trump, in an alliance with the liberal establishment, which originally conspired to destroy Occupy, and thus weaponized to attack a segment of the population that is alienated by neoliberalism, but turned to the misdirection of Trumpism to advance their grievances. Which takes us to today. Does there need to be a resurrection of the Occupy movement? The simple answer is no. The long-form answer is there does need to be another mass proletarian movement and uprising, but not in the form of the reanimated corpse of the Occupy movement. At this present time, the contemporary American left, which was formed out of the Occupy movement, is far too divided, far too partisan, and far too stuck in their reformist ways to be relied upon in terms of mobilizing masses into rising up against the capitalist state. A new apparatus has to be built from the ground up to counter the problems that we face today. This new apparatus will consist of people who reject neoliberalism and who also reject the polarization of the 99% into hyper-partisan red and blue political camps. The open-ended interpretation of Occupy fostered by anarchists and the professional activists of the movement needs not to be revisited. A new proletarian movement is to stay focused and on point in resisting the upper levels of capitalism. We are not to take aforementioned new movement into a million different directions. That was a problem with Occupy, as the general public found the movement difficult to understand as it communicated no clear mission. We must not focus on reacting and attacking Trump supporters, but correcting them to take their focus off or away from divisive culture wars and pseudo-socialism, and instead redirect them to place their animus on Wall Street and neoliberalism. We must form and organize not around putting do-nothing progressive politicians into Congress, but around the creation of local unemployment councils and mutual aid organizations and associations that feed and shelter those under the boot of global capitalism. We must build communities of solidarity and not exclusion, nor hold people living today responsible for the social atrocities of yesteryear, so long as those people are not complicit in perpetuating those atrocities in the present day. We must discourage the spread of radical liberalism to embed itself within our operations. Radical liberals, which includes anarchists, mind you, at least a lot of anarchists today, are about dividing the public into hyper-partisan camps based on splitting hairs over linguistics and aesthetics. They are problematic. We must gradually organize working people, regardless where they fall on the cultural political spectrum, to take measures to defend themselves from neoliberal aggression. Occupy was indeed a watershed for a brief moment in time. I look back fondly upon my involvement within Zuccotti Park. But that is not to say that I ignore the movement's problems. It was a lesson to learn in terms of knowing what to do and what not to do when waging class struggle. However, as Occupy exists today, the key players who were involved are far too divided and far too hostile towards one another to ever set their differences aside and work in tandem towards uniting the 99%. That's the plain truth. Many of those organizers from that period are lost in the throes of sectarianism, cultural crusades, and hyper-partisan political squabbles to be relied upon in terms of conveying a message that will resonate with average, everyday working people struggling to survive. We cannot rely on them to advance a new cause, to perform an exorcism on the specter of neoliberalism that haunts the public both nationally and internationally. Thus why it is not ideal or even practical to resurrect Occupy, a new mass movement of new organizers separate from the corrupt apparatus left behind from Occupy Wall Street is what is needed, with less anarchist and no radical liberal influence. That is what is needed to address our deteriorating material conditions. However, such a gargantuan endeavor takes years, not months, to organize. But as a veteran of the Occupy movement, who was not tainted by the influence of hyperpartisanship, I will be more than glad to aid any young organizer who looks to build toward this new apparatus with the intent of getting the proletarian struggle against neoliberalism back on track. I am there. Long live the 99%. This is Comrade Pella, signing off.